The Resilience Across Borders podcast is intended for education, support, and inspiration. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer any professional, medical, or health advice. If you are dealing with or suffering from any psychological or medical conditions, please seek help from a qualified health professional. Hello and welcome back to Resilience Across Borders podcast. I'm your host, Rachid. In today's episode, we will talk about mastering connection and touching on the art of effective communication. As we all know, effective communication is the cornerstone of meaningful relationships and meaningful connections. In our world that is filled with diverse perspectives and constant interactions, mastering the art of communication is essential and key to peaceful, productive, and smoother interactions. We will explore some key elements of effective communication and how they contribute to enhancing relationships. So, let's unpack this by first understanding effective communication. Because communication is more than words, it's about understanding and being understood. It's imperative to get into the importance of clear expression, active listening, and nonverbal cues. Effective communication fosters empathy and creates a solid foundation for strong connections. Well, since we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, let's remind ourselves of the power of active listening. We're going to start there. So, active listening is a skill that transforms conversations. You know, we all like to talk and it's really difficult. It takes certain skill and a lot of work to be able to actually hold back and listen instead of just waiting for our turn to talk. So the significance of being fully present, paraphrasing, for instance, and asking clarifying questions is invaluable instead of jumping to assumptions, for example. Active listening can resolve conflicts, deepen understanding, and strengthen bonds. This includes listening to understand, listening to connect, listening to relate, and help the other person regulate. There are examples of like communication where someone is distressed or tense situations especially, and that's where it's really important to even emphasize this. So for instance, before you can reason with someone who is upset, and this applies to parenting, it applies to romance, it applies to business or other relationships, you need to remember the 3 R's. And the 3 R's are regulate, relate, and reason. Because for instance, before you can actually reason with the person, they need to feel heard, you need to let them get it out, and you need to meet them where they are, and then, relate to them. Then there is a better chance of you being able to reason with them, or maybe help them calm down and help them to maybe take the action that you need them to take, depending on the purpose of the communication here, on what the goal is. Also, let's talk about nonverbal communication. Body language and facial expressions, for example, gestures in communication. We must be aware of the nuances of nonverbal cues and how they contribute to the overall message. Be aware of your own body language along with the other person's body language. You may have heard of the 55-38-7 formula by Albert Mehrabian, deducing basically that 55% of the communication between us is nonverbal and 38% is vocal and has to do with the tone of the voice, and 7% is the actual words being expressed. Of course, there are never any good blanket statements, absolutes, or things like that. And there are always exceptions. But we can all mostly recognize when someone's body language does not match what they are saying. Like someone saying yes while they're shaking their head, and their head is saying no. So we must also keep in mind the context and specifics of certain situations, such as the roles and who's in what role, and so on, like a boss to an employee, or a parent to their child. For instance, someone crossing their arms doesn't always mean they are resistant or close-minded. It could just mean they are cold. So keep that in mind. But for the most part, it's important to be aware of the body language and what it is saying, what it is expressing. And then also, to overcome most barriers to communication, we must address common challenges in communication. This can be misunderstandings, assumptions, and emotional barriers. We can do that by practicing empathy, seeking clarification, and cultivating self-awareness. An example is to restate what you hear by saying something to the tune or something like, "Let me know if I heard you and understood you correctly," and voicing back what you heard and understood, so the other person can confirm or let you know if something is lost in the transmission or the translation. I remember an exercise we did before, one time in one of the corporate gigs that I had, or some kind of corporate setting or training, where we did this exercise where a message is whispered into the person next to you, their ear, and is passed on verbally in that fashion from one person to the next until it gets to the last person at the end of the room or the end of the conference table. And guess what? That message is almost always modified or completely changed, or the meaning of it rearranged by the time it is passed on to the last person. So it's important to voice back sometimes, especially again in those more sensitive types of conversations, and some of those like conflict resolution type of conversations and things like that. And also it's important to adapt to different settings, because communication differs in personal and professional contexts. For example, communication is at the heart of building strong friendships, romantic relationships, and professional collaborations. So we must tailor the communication to various settings. The way you talk to your friends is not the way you are going to talk to your boss, or in a more formal setting, or in different cultural settings. For example, different cultures have different ways they approach the communication, the way they approach the tone, the way they approach the posture, and so on and so forth. There are many tools and exercises for enhancing communication skills. These tools can be practical. This may include role-playing scenarios. They may include journaling. They may include participating in communication workshops. As with most skills, most essential skills in life, we must actively work on honing our communication abilities. So again, through communication, we can nurture relationships. It is very important to express gratitude, provide constructive feedback with tact and with tactfulness, and maintain open lines of communication. Continuous improvement in communication leads to lasting connections. So in conclusion, effective communication is an art that requires practice, it requires patience, and a genuine desire to connect. By honing these skills, we can enrich our relationships, whether they be personal or professional or other. The art of effective communication not only fosters understanding, but also creates a world where connections thrive. As always, thank you for tuning into the Resilience Across Borders podcast. If you are enjoying this podcast and finding it helpful to you, please let us know so we can continue to make more episodes about these topics. You can also follow the blog posts and new episodes as they get added at this URL. The URL is @resilience.com. @resilience.com. Remember to be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and stay resilient.